Hello, and welcome to your weekly werewolf report in the year of the werewolf. Maybe if I act confident in it, I won't hate it, you know? How are you doing this week? Has the world been treating you well? Are you enjoying the weather? It's finally here in the east warmed up a little bit, and I'm not wearing my big fuzzy socks and fearing that the Raynaud's syndrome will rot my toes off, so that's fun. We've also had a good week because maybe it wasn't a great week, but it was a fruitful week, and I can talk about some things, and I can recommend some things, and I'm always happy about that because... So I mentioned last week that the book that I was going to read this week, I had mixed feelings on. I had low expectations, and that's because I got the novelization of a movie, and that novelization is The Wolfman, based on the 2010 movie, and Jonathan Maberry did the novelization. So I had a little bit of faith in it, but I know that, novelizations of movies, they can be great because they add further insight, or they're just kind of like garbled up, chewed up retelling of the movie. This was good. It was, it provided more insight into Lawrence and Sir John. And I'm going to assume you've seen the movie. Now, the reason why I bought this book is because I like this movie. If you watch the previous videos that I've done on werewolves, where I've done the long lists of werewolf movies I think you should watch, this movie was on that list because I do like it. I went and saw it in the theaters when it first came out. For the longest time, I was mad at what they did to the character of Sir John Talbot. Because in the 1941-40 version of The Wolfman, Claude Rains is the best part of that movie in my mind. The fact that the Wolfman must be freed from his curse, aka killed, by someone who loves him. I've always loved that was his father. And Claude Rains portrays Sir John. He's a little aloof. He's a very pragmatic, very logical man. And just as much as we're watching, he's named Larry in the old one. They call him Lawrence in the remake because they go a little more Victorian. But Larry is having his descent because he's worried about, he knows what he is. He knows what he's changing into, and he knows he's killing people. But Sir John has his own journey where he goes from wondering why his son believes this silly thing, this very illogical thing, to Larry's hysteria starts to affect him, where he starts questioning his own logic, his own feet on terra firma beliefs. There's no way you believe in werewolves, except it gets under his skin just enough that he goes out looking on the moors for Larry that night, that fated night where he sets his son free. And I've always thought that was kind of incredible storytelling, because the temptation to the person who loves you, who sets you free, would of course be a romantic person. It would be the person who loves you romantically, which they did in the remake, which gets on my nerves because as someone who's not much of a romantic myself, I hate that it always defaults to romantic love. I loved that Claude Rains, who of course loves his son, is the one who has to set him free. And what they do to Sir John in the remake is, spoilers, in case you haven't watched it yet, go ahead and turn this off, but Sir John is a werewolf. Sir John is the werewolf who turns Lawrence in this. And Anthony Hopkins plays Sir John in this, and he plays Sir John as a very unfriendly person. He's not the same kind of imperious character that he is in the original, the way Claude Rains portrays him. He's cold, and he's kind of hostile towards Lawrence, who's played by Benicio del Toro, wonderfully, by the way. And they have this strange relationship because they have kind of a messed up past. And I wanted to read this book. I promise I'm coming back around to the point, to stay with me. I wanted to read this book because this is a movie that I watch about once a year. And in the last maybe 2 or 3 years, I've started coming around on what they did to Sir John, because why wouldn't they want to mix it up? And I also, because you know how much I hate this, blaming this virulent, highly communicable, highly dangerous disease on the outside group of the gypsies, the G word, has always bothered me. Now, there are still gypsies in this movie, and they have the knowledge of the werewolf, but they are not the ones responsible for spreading that disease. Now, you can see there's kind of a metaphor going on here, kind of a simile of, lycanthropy, syphilis, various sexually transmitted diseases that you would blame on the outside group. It's gross and I don't like it. You know I don't. So I appreciated what they did, because they do in the movie try to blame this on the gypsies. And Lawrence goes to talk to the gypsies, and the gypsies are like, look, we know what it is, and you're not safe right now, by the way, but here, we can help you. And the fact that the curse is much closer to home than anybody thinks, the fact that there's a whole story for why, because in the original, there is a thing. Sir John Talbot, Claude Rains is British, and Lon Chaney Jr. is, of course, American, and the character of Larry strolls in all American. There's been a rift in this family that they don't really talk about a lot in the original. Larry was raised in America. He wasn't raised at Talbot Hall. And they kind of confront it more in the remake. It's a messed up story, and I don't think for a minute that's why it would have happened in the original, for various reasons, but of course being Sir John in the original is not a werewolf. But we get a little more personal, and I've come around on the character of Sir John being a bad guy and being a werewolf in this remake. Because first of all, it doesn't take away from Claude Rains' performance. It doesn't take away from the original. That story still exists, but they decided to try something new. And after spending damn near a decade mad at this movie for what they did, I've started to kind of slowly thaw on it. I've started to kind of be like, wait a minute, this might actually be a good idea. Wait a minute, this might actually be a neat twist. And reading this book, where we get a little further into it, and Jonathan Maberry writes Sir John a little differently than Anthony Hopkins plays him in the movie. He's very duplicitous. He's at times not exactly warm, but demonstrative in a way that unseats Lawrence. It kind of takes him off his feet. And then he'll go back to being hostile and cruel. It's a very interesting dynamic. It's much more interesting than the dynamic between Lawrence and Gwen. And it gets really, really played up, really button popping in this book, which I didn't care for, if I'm being honest, but I just admitted I'm not much of a romantic. Those kinds of storylines don't really get their hooks in me very much. I would just rather we didn't most of the time. And in this one, I get it. And we got the romantic person being the one to release the cursed. But I like this book. As far as, novelizations of movies, this one wasn't bad at all. I'm glad I read it. I enjoyed it. I really did. It was well written. I enjoyed the Sir John and Lawrence stuff a lot, actually. And it's a great werewolf book. If you don't ever want to watch the movie, it's a great werewolf book, full of monster stuff, full of violence and carnage, and I enjoyed myself. So that's the book. Had a great time. Totally recommend it. But I recommend the movie more, because the more I watch it and the more time goes on, the more I'm loving it. And I liked it from the beginning. The only part I didn't like was the Anthony Hopkins werewolf. But as time goes on, I'm softening. And that's probably because I've seen it dozens of times at this point, but what do you want me to say? I'm easy to please, and I'm a sucker for a werewolf. Speaking of which, the movies this week. So, I accidentally happened upon a theme. Female werewolves. I didn't seek this out. It accidentally happened. Female werewolves who are sedated. Heavy sedation, keeping them out of a place where they transform, where they completely turn. And they play out very differently. One movie I very much liked, and the other movie, we'll get to it. So the first movie that I watched is a movie called When Animals Dream. It was made in 2014. It's a Danish movie, so there are subtitles. Now, the husband did not go to D&D last night. He was home for Werewolf night, and he sat downstairs with me. I offered to take it to another room, but he wanted to be a part of Werewolf night. And he said he thought this movie was slow. To be fair, he was on his Switch and only half paying attention, and because it's subtitled, he didn't catch a lot of stuff going on. It isn't a fast-paced movie. This is not a high-octane, destroy everything, blood and guts movie, especially not through most of it. It gets very monstery and murdery at the end, but there's something very subdued and intense about this movie that I really liked. And I like watching foreign movies sometimes because it always amuses me the difference between other cultures in America. We Americans, we're very animated. We do a lot with our faces and we're very loud. And this movie takes place on a Danish small fishing village. And everybody there's kind of salty, kind of cold. They're very stoic people, and they're not warm, happy people. There's not a lot of smiling. The warmest person in this movie is the main character's father. He is a warm and loving person, and your heart breaks for him in this movie. But everybody else is just kind of cold, and there are lines delivered that if an American actor had delivered these lines, there would have been a lot of scrunching up of the face, a lot of teeth gnashing, a lot of emotion portrayed to the face. We would have been loud. There would have been a lot of that, But in this movie, these very intense lines are delivered softly and with a very subdued face. And it's fascinating. The movie is about a girl who, it opens with her at the doctor complaining about a rash. And there's just weird things going on with her body. And the doctor is kind of looking her over and being like, come back in a month. And I remember thinking, this is weird because the way he's looking her over and the questions that he's asking, he seems concerned, but then, he runs his fingers down her spine and he's feeling along her vertebra. And then he goes, okay, this is fine. Come back in a month. And I remember thinking at the time, well, that's weird. Now this all gets revealed. It makes sense later. It didn't at the time, but it does. And the girl lives with her father and her mother. And her mother is some kind of sick. And we don't know what for a while. We just know she's wheelchair bound. She doesn't talk. She doesn't interact in any sort of way. They keep giving her shots. And it's obvious she's being very heavily sedated. And the story kind of opens from there. I will say both of these movies, another thing they have in common is hereditary lycanthropy, if that helps. I thought this movie was good. I really enjoyed this movie. Again, subdued and intense. It's not the high energy werewolf movies I usually love, but I did like this one. And then after this movie, Tubi showed me a Howling movie that I hadn't seen, and I decided to give it a try. I made it 15 minutes in before rage quitting. Now, listeners of the Ghost Writers podcast know that the Howling franchise of movies and we got a past, and it's not a good one. And I wanted to try to see if maybe I could make peace with it with this movie. No, the grudge continues. I did not enjoy this movie. 15 minutes and then I turned it off. So I tried something else. I tried a movie that I saw also on Shudder, and it was on Tubi, called Bloodthirsty. And editing Summer, if you could put the date where it came out down here, please, because I forgot to look that up. It's a recent movie. And I didn't hate this movie. I didn't dislike it. I was engaged. I was into it the whole time. I'm just not sure if I liked it. I need to sit with this one a little longer. There were definitely things that happened in this movie that I hadn't seen before that were like, ooh. But I don't know. Like, I watched the whole movie with this look on my face. Trying to make sense if I was enjoying what was happening or not. It held my attention, which is always a good sign, because if the movie is really bad, and when we're talking low budget movies, indie movies, sometimes they do lose me. This one did not. I was into it. I watched it till the end. It's about a musician who's just released her first record, and it's a hit. And her girlfriend, yay, gay horror, I love it. Her and her girlfriend go to stay at this big house owned by a producer. This man he was like in a boy band in the 90s. To those of us who listened to boy bands in the 90s, having him be the old guy in this, it's like, oh, shit. But he's apparently a big deal producer now, and he specifically asked to collaborate with her on her second album. And she's at a point where there is a massive fear of the sophomore slump. She doesn't want her second album to be a disappointment compared to her first album. So this is a big deal. This is a very big deal. And first of all, this house is so cool. On the outside, it has that sort of lodge look to it. It's snowy outside, and you see the heavy wooden beams, and you go inside, and it's this kind of, it varies from room to room. Some rooms are kind of cottagey and light and airy, and some rooms they kind of align with the lodge aesthetic, and some rooms are like gothic, heavy gothic furniture. The doorways look they've got the pitch to it, and the house is cool. So her name is Gray, this musician. She suffers from hallucinations, and she takes medication to kind of tamp down the hallucinations. She is a vegan. She lives a very strict vegan life. She is a person of principles. And the hallucinations that she has usually involve herself transforming and dreaming of eating live meat, usually small animals. And as a vegan, as someone who very passionately feels for the protection of animals, this disturbs her naturally. So she comes to this guy's house to work on the second album, because he's got this fancy recording studio. And they're collaborating, and she has her lines that she won't cross, because, again, she's a principled person. And this man keeps kind of moving the line. Come on, a little closer. Oh, one drink won't hurt you, because she doesn't drink because of the hallucinations. It interacts with her drugs. He talks her into not taking her pills anymore. He gives her some meat that she starts eating, and things start unraveling for her. And what it turns out who he is an interesting twist. Her girlfriend, who is a very supportive character, she you know how in movies and shows that great man always has that super supportive wife. She is that to Gray. Her name's Charlie, and she has her lines too, and she's a principled person. And I recommend this movie. Again, it's on Shudder and Tubi. I do recommend watching it. The biggest downside of it, and this is a personal thing, this won't affect everybody, there's a lot of music. There's a lot of her and this producer workshopping various songs to put on this album to record in full. And this music is very much not to my taste. It's a lot of it. And I think that's one thing that kind of started, can we move on from this, please? The actors are fantastic. There is a transformation scene, and it's as good as any transformation scene. It's not bad. It's just, I don't know. The ending, I have questions about the ending. This is the thing. I want someone to watch this so we can talk about the ending, because my husband was half paying attention to this one. So when I started kind of shouting about why did this happen this way, he didn't know what I was talking about. And he just kind of sits looking at me like, what do you want me to do? But I do recommend it. Bloodthirsty. I don't know. There will be parts of this that live with me. There will be pieces that I think about because it's shot beautifully. There is striking imagery. And in monster movies, I think that's sometimes undervalued. You need that striking imagery. You need those pictures that are just burned into your head, things that happen, things that are said, something that happened in the way the actor reacts to it. Those things are important in this kind of storytelling, and this movie certainly delivered, as did When Animals Dream. So it was a good night. It was a good werewolf night here in the Cannon House. I have to think a little more about Bloodthirsty, but I do recommend it. And if you do watch it, will you please come talk to me about the ending, because I have questions. I have problems. I have a complaint I would like to lodge to the manager. But that'll be it this week. Next week, I don't know. We'll see. Hopefully this, we've got optimism going right now. Hopefully this maintains. We keep reading and seeing good, and I can keep adding to the list of what I can recommend to werewolf fans who feel that there isn't a lot out there, because it turns out there is. So I hope the world is treating you well. I hope you're doing well. Thank you so much for putting up with this every week, for being here, and I will see you next week. Bye.